What could dissolving the country's war cabinet mean during a time of conflict, and would this impact or have tremendous effect on the country's military? As the question is running through the minds of many as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announces the end of Israel's 6-member war cabinet. The war cabinet, which comprised the Prime Minister himself, former Defense Minister Benny Gantz, current Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, among others, operated independently from the broader Israeli government, charged with the responsibility of making decisions related to the conflict in Gaza. According to an Israeli official, the Prime Minister announced the decision at a meeting of the Political Security Cabinet on Sunday evening. It's unclear who specifically Mr. Netanyahu would consult with over matters regarding the war in Gaza. His far-right coalition partners have been pushing for a new war cabinet to be established following the resignation of opposition leader Benny Gantz. In another development, dozens of pro-Palestine demonstrators gathered outside the residence of U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in Brooklyn, in the United States on Sunday to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Protesters accused the West of perpetrating lies to justify Israel's military objectives in Gaza and the Middle East. Back in April, a similar rally involving thousands of demonstrators took place near Mr. Schumer's residence as the Senate debated a foreign aid bill which included assistance for Israel.
Across the world to justify its military invasion and its military objectives in Gaza and in the Middle East.
Police in Austin, Texas, in the United States have released the description of a suspect following a mass shooting at a Juneteenth celebration over the weekend. 2 people were killed in the attack, 14 others injured. It all happened around 10:50 p.m. on Saturday. The suspect is described as a black male with a thin build, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, with short dreadlocks. At the time of the incident, he was wearing a white hoodie. He is also said to be aged 19 or 20 and is considered armed and dangerous. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives is offering $5,000 reward for information leading to the suspect's arrest.
There was just tons of commotion, people running and screaming and just trying to get away and, just afraid. And so a lot of friends of mine called to check on us and make sure that we were okay because they heard about it pretty much right away. And, people were just scared for their loved ones and worried that something happened, and nobody expected that at this event.
We heard shots. At first, I think a lot of people thought they were fireworks, and then it became evidently clear that they were gunshots. And that's when folks started running, wounded. We saw people on the ground who folks were doing CPR on. It's just pure chaos.
We were serving daiquiris. We were one of the vendors here. And we had a line, and then we looked up, and there was flashes of, from a gun. Obviously, it was an automatic weapon, and it was letting off multiple rounds, and everybody just kind of scattered. Well, our serving window is actually on the other side, which is where the fires started. Apparently, people were running around our trailer, and maybe the shooter was on the other end of our trailer, and it looks like a bullet kind of grazed through here.
A BBC analysis has found the Greek Coast Guard has caused the deaths of dozens of migrants in the Mediterranean over a 3-year period, including 9 who were deliberately thrown into the water. The 9 are among more than 40 people alleged to have died as a result of being forced out of Greek territorial waters or taken back out to sea after reaching Greek islands. The Greek Coast Guard has rejected the accusations of illegal activities. The Greek government has long been accused of forced returns, pushing people back towards Turkey, where they've crossed from, which is illegal under international law. But this is the first time the BBC has calculated the number of incidents which allege that fatalities occurred as a result of the Greek Coast Guard's actions. Meanwhile, 8 people have died and around 60 more have been injured in a train crash in the eastern Indian state of West Bengal. The accident occurred when a goods train hit a stationary passenger train in the New Jalpaiguri area earlier this morning, local time. Dramatic visuals from the accident site showed one wagon of the express train suspended in the air. Authorities say human error may have led to the crash, and detailed investigation will be held. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee expressed shock and said action was taken on a war footing. The dead include the driver and the assistant driver of the goods train and the guard of the express. There are reports thousands of people have been evacuated in southeast China after heavy rains hammered the region over the weekend. State broadcaster CCTV said over 35,000 people were evacuated as of Saturday. By this morning, more than 10,000 people were evacuated in Meizhou, the hardest flood-hit city in Guangdong province. According to the Ministry of Water Resources, 17 waterways in the major Han River basin recorded flooding above alert level, including 2 rivers at record flood levels. Guangdong province, an economic powerhouse home to 127 million people, is among parts of southern China that are subject to annual flooding from April to September. But the region has faced more intense rainstorms and severe floods in recent years, as scientists warn that the climate crisis will amplify extreme weather, making it deadlier and more frequent. And those warnings were underscored in April when deadly floods submerged parts of Guangdong after rain poured for multiple days. Politics now. The countdown is still on towards general elections in the UK, we're learning. Fewer than 200,000 of estimated 3.5 million British people living abroad for more than 15 years have applied to vote in the elections despite change in law in January, returning their right to participate in the ballot. More than 230,000 overseas voters were registered to vote in the last election in December 2019, when Boris Johnson was set to power on the back of promises he would get Brexit done. This year, record numbers were expected after the end of the 15-year rule. The latest Electoral Commission figures show that just over 137,000 overseas voters had applied this year, most of them since January 16, when the law changed, with an estimated 61,000 still on the register last year, and assuming all are still valid for the July 4 election. This means a possible total of 199,000 Britons abroad have applied for the votes. Now, those fall short of the record 285,000 overseas voters when Theresa May called her snap election in 2017. The Electoral Commission is urging Britons overseas to apply online by the cut-off time of midnight on June 18. We know that there are eligible voters all around the world, so we're calling on anyone with friends, family abroad to help spread the word and let them know to register before the deadline. That's according to the Electoral Commission. Well, the deadline for a postal vote is June 19th, but British in Europe is urging people to apply for a proxy date, which can be applied for up until June 26. Let's bring in political analyst Nathaniel Oguni to talk some more about this. Oh, these are pretty interesting figures, Nathaniel, that we're getting from you British citizens abroad. What do you think is responsible for the drop in numbers of those who have been registered to vote abroad?
So I think if you look back to 2019, as you started discussing, that was a Brexit election. Boris Johnson had the pledge to get Brexit done. The Liberal Democrats were suggesting that there should be a second referendum. And so lots of Brits abroad were quite interested in how the UK's relationship with the EU panned out. A lot of them were looking at whether they would be able to become citizens of whatever EU country they'd moved to, what their rights would be in those countries. And so it was really important at that time for lots of them to get their votes out. We saw a massive spike in overseas voter registration. Actually, we've seen a spike since 2015, really. So originally, if you were based abroad, about 35,000 people in any given year would be registered to vote. Now the figures have massively exploded, as you hinted to. We've got over 200,000. Now I think that Brexit is a settled matter. It's less important for them to vote.
Could it also have anything to do with the way Britons view the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and his policies?
I think less so. When you look at people who are based abroad, the vast majority of them, particularly in countries like Spain, are retirees. And so they're often people who have worked in the UK and then moved out to somewhere like Spain to retire. And if you look at them, they are generally speaking conservative voters. The older you get, the more likely you are to vote Conservative. And indeed, a good number of them have benefited from what we call the triple lock. So the state pension in the UK rises by inflation, wages, or 2.5% at least every year. And so actually, state pension has gone up by about £900 this year. So lots of them have benefited from that.
Nathaniel, how does overseas voting work in any election? What are some of the requirements for British citizens who live abroad?
So the voter registration requirements, if you're based abroad, are a bit more difficult. You have to first prove that you had an address in the UK. So it's not just about sort of being a British citizen. You have to prove that you had an address in the UK. And sometimes if you've lost papers or if you don't have the documentation, then that can be difficult. But you have to prove that you had an address in the UK, explain that address, and then you have to re-register every 3 years. And so many of the people that were registered in, say, the 2019 election, their registrations have since expired.
And those ballots are sent in earlier than the election's date?
So the voters based abroad have two choices. They can either vote by proxy or they can vote by post. So when they vote by proxy, they have to nominate somebody who is based within the area they used to live in when they were in the UK. So they nominate that person, and that person effectively casts two votes. So they cast one vote in their own name and then one vote in the name of the person that they are acting on behalf of. Or you can do a postal vote. Doing a postal vote can be a bit more tricky because it has to land in the UK before the election date. And actually, it has to get to your local authority before the election date. And so that means the timelines are quite short, particularly if you're posting from further away.
Yes, and I imagine people should be racing to the nearing high commissions to post their votes. When will the ballots be opened and then counted as part of the election?
So the way elections work in the UK is quite instant. If we have a change in power on the 5th of July, we'll have our votes counted overnight. So the polls are open on the day of the election, on the 4th, from 7 in the morning to 10 at night, from 7 in the morning to 10 at night. And then usually it's a two-stage process. So there's verification to check that you've got all the votes in one place, and then counting begins immediately. And so we begin to see the first results dropping just after midnight, around 1 in the morning. Those tend to be from an area called Sunderland in the north. They're known for racing to count the ballots before anybody else. Of course, accuracy still matters, but they're known for getting that done quite quickly. They tend to be one of the first to declare, and then you see the larger constituencies, those that have more votes to count, usually declaring after that. But by 7, 8 in the morning the following day, you usually have a pretty clear picture of who's won that election.
Right, and I know we've talked about this before, but it's just 2 weeks to the election. So are people still eager to vote on July 4?
So I think we'll still see sort of above 60% or so turnout. But the UK also has the Euros going on at the moment. So Scotland were playing on Friday. Unfortunately, they didn't do too well. But England were playing yesterday. So the Euros are a football tournament taking place in Germany this year. And England played Serbia. And they actually won 1-0. And so actually you find that the majority of the front pages of newspapers were concerned with the Euros rather than the upcoming election. Indeed, several of the debates clash with days that England is playing abroad. And to be honest, I think most people will be watching the game rather than watching those debates.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people were grateful for the Euros, a perfect distraction from political matters on the ground. Help us understand, those of us who will be watching from outside, will there be televised debates this time round for any of the positions or the position of the Prime Minister? Will there be televised debates? Will they have to go head to head and all of that?
Yes, so we have debates taking place in a number of formats. I think we have 7 debates in total, actually. So a number of the debates are one-to-one, head-to-head. You have Rishi Sunak stood on one side, you have Keir Starmer stood on the other, and then you have a moderator stood in the middle. And they take questions from the moderator. The moderator will ask them whether they want to raise taxes, what they want to do for schools, what they want to do for the education system, things like that. So that's a head-to-head debate. And I think the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, does quite well in that format. He does quite well when he's able to go on the attack. He does quite well when he's able to ask direct questions. One of his favourite phrases is, Keir Starmer has no plan, or indeed to talk about the £2,000 of tax raises that a Labour government would have to bring in if they wanted to enact their plans. Equally, we have a number of other formats. So there are 7-way debates, which include all of the parties, so including the Liberal Democrats, the Reform Party, the Scottish Nationalists, the Welsh Nationalists, the Green Party. And so the leaders of the parties tend not to go to those. They tend to send their deputies or representatives. But there are those 7-way debates. There are also interviews. And so we saw last week there was a Sky News interview just before both leaders took questions. But that was scheduled in such a way that none of the leaders were on the stage at the same time. So one was on and then the next came on.
Yeah, I'm sure that people will be looking forward to those debates, and we'll also be looking forward to speaking with you, Nathaniel, during the time of the elections. Hopefully you'll be done by then, and we can get your analysis on what's been happening on the day itself. Thanks again for joining us on The World Today.
Not to worry, thank you.
Checking in on politics in South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma says his party, the Umkhonto-we-Sizwe, will be joining the opposition alliance in parliament to be able to coordinate resistance to the governing coalition led by the African National Congress. The MK would become part of the official opposition, joining a group of small parties calling themselves the Progressive Caucus. A caucus which collectively controls almost a third of the seats, includes the Radical Economic Freedom Fighters and centre-left United Democratic Movement. Mr. Zuma also criticized the government of national unity in South Africa, describing the partnership as a white-led unholy alliance between the DA and the ANC of Ramaphosa. The MK party came third in the May 29th elections and said none of its 58 newly elected lawmakers will join the ruling coalition. It also maintained that last month's elections were rigged and wanted the results annulled. Members of Parliament late on Friday re-elected ANC leader Cyril Ramaphosa for a second term as president. However, a government is yet to be formed. So how do people in South Africa feel about the reality of a coalition government involving the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance? Many in Johannesburg expressed mixed opinions over the historic coalition between the two. Locals noted that this collaboration by former Liberation Movement ANC and the centrist DA is something new, somewhere South Africa's never been before. They're hopeful, however, that the new government will start delivering basic services and address poverty.
I think ANC and the DA, I think it's a good partnership to lead South Africa. Because I know DA, it always talk about corruption, and the DA is always against corruption. So if ANC is going to lead alone, they do as they please. But because there's a DA there, they won't do as they please, because they know DA is going to fight with them, because DA, they didn't want any corruption. I don't think MK must be included. At least I can say the EFF. But although the EFF, they are full of themselves, they didn't want to work with white people. And the politics of South Africa is not all about colors now. now it's about who is capable of doing it. Because it's been 30 years, we see the ANC was incompetent.
I think it's gonna bring like a positive, especially when it comes to the changes, because I think ANC so far, according to my observation, it has failed us. Like looking from 1994 till date, like the only thing which is happening only for the political guys, but rather by the youth of South Africa.
In terms of the government of national unity, look, it's something new. It's something South Africa has never been before, and it will be nice to see it work. So we'll have to wait and see what the politicians come up with. But I really do hope they put the people first. I think the ANC has learnt a lesson from corruption and not delivering basic services. So I really do hope they start to deliver basic services and they help to address poverty.
I think it's a bad idea. I mean, why would you go with Ramaphosa? I mean, why would you go with ANC? I think it's all enslavement in all sorts of ways, so that people can, follow ANC or the leader, so that ANC don't really go out of power. Like, you just help them do more and all that. So I don't really know, but then I can't really trust them.
Back in South Africa, where the president of the Nigerian Citizens Association, Frank Onyekwelu, announced that NICASA, along with all Nigerian bodies in South Africa, is working diligently to address and resolve the challenges faced by Nigerian students in the country, including permit issues. Onyekwelu made the remarks at the Nigerian Students Association National Congress in Johannesburg over the weekend. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Semosa, reports.
Young people gathered for the Nigerian Students Association's National Congress in Johannesburg under the theme Upscaling to the Next Level. Challenges facing
today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.